You're listening to a podcast from DCT Audio. I'm Dave Thomas, and I've been producing audio content for over 10 years. Thank you for listening to this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it. For several years now, the levels of mental health and well-being within the UK police have been in decline. Many will argue that this is a result of an ever-increasing workload, a reduction in capacity and experience, underfunding, and a perception that social and mainstream media proactively portray a negative narrative of law enforcement within the UK. Additionally, lenient sentencing, poor organisational practices, and the disproportionate time spent on officers under investigation have contributed to create a perfect storm. In this short series of podcasts, I will be looking at the rising trend of police officers taking their own lives. I will be speaking with a variety of people to put a spotlight on police suicide, the reasons behind it, and hopefully how we can halt its rise. My guest today has had a varied career, previously working as a mortuary assistant at the age of 16. She later became a biologist before becoming a psychologist. She continues to do that work that started over 30 years ago. Dr. Noreen Tehrani has a special interest in trauma management and has advised various bodies over the years, including the emergency services, who have dealt with several high-profile major incidents. She is also a visiting lecturer and has worked with many companies in the commercial sector. Noreen is a patron of several organisations, including Road Peace. In this episode, Noreen explains how the brain works and how trauma is indeed a biological problem that can be treated quite easily. We also discuss empathy and pathways to thinking about trauma. I'm delighted to say she joins me now. I was lucky enough to have attended one of your presentations, and I remember you talking about the brain, how it functions, and essentially how is it possible to think ourselves better. Just how does the brain work?
Well, the brain's a bit complicated, and I can't really talk about everything that the brain does. That would be taking most of your podcast. But how it works with trauma is really quite interesting, in that what we have within our brain is something a bit like a CPU that you get in a computer, a central processing unit, or a hub that you might get in a distribution centre. And what that does, it gathers all of the sensory information that is going on around us. And so the way that we know what's going on in the world is through our senses. That's the only way we get information in. So the things that we see, the things that we hear, smell, taste, and the last sensory function is touch, but is much more than touch, because we're learning a lot from what's going on in our bodies, how we feel, the hunches that we may have, the kind of the hair standing on end and things like that, actually tell us a lot about what's going on about us, that sort of automatic feelings that we get. So what happens in the brain is that all of this information is going into the thalamus, where it's analysed, fairly gently, but it tells us, the thalamus is able to tell the brain, this is an okay sort of day, there's nothing much going on, and the information just is gradually going through, and we're aware of what's in our environment. Right. From there, it goes into a very small body which is almond-shaped. It's called the amygdala, and that means almond in Latin. So the amygdala has the role of telling us what is dangerous, and it's already primed when we're born to tell us about the things that are dangerous to human beings. So things like spiders, things like snakes, things like falling down, heights and water. So if you put a child near any of those things, they'll be nervous of them, even though no one has told them, no one's talked to them, but it's an automatic, innate fear that is very protective. So those things are already there. So the amygdala has the ability to recognise other things that are dangerous because it's already been queued up to do that. From there, the information goes into the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that translates the information into something that can be recalled and be used in the upper part of the brain. So all of this information is going outside our consciousness in the lower part of the brain. And from there it goes to the prefrontal cortex, which is where it starts getting to be analysed. And you have things like judgments taking place, or is this right or is this wrong? Values are taking place in that part of the brain.
So these experiences are almost like filtered first before it gets to the main part of the brain, I suppose.
Yeah, and into your consciousness. So you're not aware of any of these things happening. Just as a little bit extra, the prefrontal cortex is very sensitive, and in children that have had a bad start in life, it's not as well developed, and that part of the brain is involved in calming and soothing us down. So you find with lots of children that have had a difficult start is that they have very bad behaviours which they can't control, and that's because of that. Okay, so we've now got all of this, all of these bits are there, all of these parts of the brain, these low parts of the brain, and then into the thinking part above. So when something bad happens, the thalamus recognises that something's going on here. This is dangerous, very, very quickly. And it intensifies the neural transfer of information. So the energy coming from the sensory information is increased. It's like it's amplified.
Yes.
So it then gets to the amygdala, causes the amygdala to get red hot because it's burning up lots and lots of energy. There is a fuse in the hippocampus, which is made of thin-walled nerves. They get burst, and the information gets kind of orphaned, gets stuck in the amygdala.
Right.
And that is what trauma is.
Right.
So it's a biological situation. So people are not traumatized because they're weak. They're not traumatized because they're hopeless or helpless and incompetent. They become traumatized because the way that their brain works, they've blown a fuse and they can't do anything about that.
Right.
So it's really important that people recognize that this isn't a weakness. This is just how things are.
And we all have the same brain, so we're all the same, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The difficulties that happen then, there are 5 different things, biological things that happen after the fuse is gone. The first one is that our arousal level gets changed. So it's a bit like the thermostat has gone, on the heating, in that normally we get to a certain point of arousal and then we just calm down or we go to sleep. But for people that have been traumatized, because of the way the adrenaline and cortisol work, and normally, you have a certain amount of adrenaline, the cortisol damps it down, so the energy is sort of damped down. You get people that are traumatized are on the edge of hyperactivity all of the time, but it's been held down because of the cortisol. So it just takes a tiny little thing for them to boil over, get irritable, lose their tempers.
Yes.
So it's a very unstable place to be in. And, it's very... uses up a lot of energy. People are tired all of the time, but they're hyperactive.
I suppose it's a bit like a car engine that's perhaps just idling, and then one that's revving quite hard and perhaps near its rev limiter.
Well, it's revving all of the time, but it's not in gear, so you're using up all your fuel, but you're not going anywhere.
Yes.
And so you just need to put it into gear and you shoot off. Does that make sense? So this is how people are when they're traumatized. So that's the first one, the arousal. Right. The second thing that happens is memory. Because the fuse is gone, memories aren't going through properly, and so people find that they're very, very forgetful. They can't remember things. And if you're talking to someone, say as a police officer, you're talking to someone that's been traumatized, you need to remember that recalling information that you may be giving them is very difficult. So you're well advised to write it down so that they do remember. So if you're making an appointment or something of that nature. But people will forget lots of things just because their memory isn't working in the way it would normally.
Well, that's interesting because I remember, times in my career, I've been quite stressed, and not only has it affected my memory, it's also, believe it or not, affected my hearing.
Right.
My hearing has actually gone down a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a sensory thing.
Yeah.
It was quite odd. It only lasted for a couple of minutes, I do definitely remember that happening.
Well, actually, what you're describing there is one of the other symptoms, which is dissociation. And if you can imagine that in trauma, your brain is going much faster, because this information is coming through, there's a lot coming through. You get distortions to your sensory information coming through. So you will, for example, I've talked to people that have been involved in armed raids who absolutely swear that they were held up with a gun for, say, 15 minutes. CCTV shows that it was like 2 minutes.
Yes.
But they believed it was much longer, and that's because the way the brain has changed, because of the speed it's going in. Time seems to be much longer because they've got apparently longer to think about it. Distances look different, sounds sound different. So you kind of in a slightly different place.
Because people always say, don't they, that time seemed to stand still.
Absolutely.
Or slowed down. It was like everything was played out in slow motion.
Absolutely. So that's another of the symptoms. Other things that happen is the ability to kind of express yourself is altered, so it's quite difficult to be able to form words, because the kind of cognitive part of the brain, the cortex, switches off the ability to say things, and that's really hard, because if you've got your brain full of activity and you're not right, and people then say to you, so how do you feel? And you say, I can't tell you, I don't know how I feel. I don't feel, I'm not right. But they can't tell you what it is that they're feeling, or they can't explain what's happened. And that's not because they're not trying. They are trying, but they just can't do it because that part's not working. So again, if you're interviewing someone that's stressed, they may not be able to talk to you. Two more symptoms that you get, and these are again automatic. So there's one which is the re-experiencing of the event. So people will have flashbacks, they will have nightmares, they will have all sorts of feelings that happened at the occasion. So let's say you were involved in a crash on a road. The next time you go past that place on the road, you get the same feeling of fear. So it's a physical kind of recalling of what happened. So that's another very common one. And I think it's quite difficult, if people have never had that before, to feel as though they're back in a situation that actually isn't happening, but they feel that they are, or they can see things around them that are causing them problems.
Well, I think it will be some source of comfort to know that all these things that you've described are perfectly normal in respect of the brain, and it's nothing to do with the individual. It's all of us suffer these things, and it's inevitable that perhaps we do when we're exposed to trauma.
I think it's also important to remember that all of these symptoms actually are useful at the time of the trauma. So for example, you want to be hyper alert when you're dealing with a really difficult situation. You want to notice what's going on because you're looking for an escape route. You don't want to be thinking about 10 different ways to solve a problem. You just want to do the most natural one that you would do, because that's the safest thing to do. So all of these symptoms are really useful, but they're not useful if they keep on going on weeks later. They've gone past their sell-by date, really.
I know we've talked a little bit about trauma. It will come as no surprise that emergency service workers are perhaps exposed to and suffer from more trauma than most professions. What are the sorts of things that can happen to us as a result of that exposure, perhaps in respect of primary, secondary, and like compassion fatigue, that sort of thing?
We tend to separate the trauma responses depending on why they've happened. So somebody that is exposed directly to something, that they see an incident or they're very close to an incident, then they will actually be likely to develop, or they may well develop, a trauma response to that. So that's primary trauma because you're exposed directly to it. There's a little bit of an add-on to there in that, for example, if you remember the Hillsborough situation, where the families became traumatized. At that time, it wasn't recognized. That wasn't recognized as primary trauma, but today that is. So if you're a family member and you hear that your husband or child has been killed in a car crash, then you can actually experience primary trauma, because you can get that kind of diagnosis because of the change in the way we look at it. That isn't the only kind of trauma you can get, because I think very common in policing is secondary trauma, where people are perhaps reading information, viewing images of child abuse, seeing artifacts, seeing things that have been related to someone. That can lead them to have symptoms of trauma. They can't get a diagnosis of trauma because they weren't exposed to a primary trauma. But it doesn't really make that much difference that if you create in your mind, and you're empathetic enough to create in your mind all of this sort of sensory information, that you can imagine what it would smell like because you've been in a similar situation, you can imagine what was happening to that person, then you create enough information in your brain to be traumatized by it.
Yes.
And I see a lot of secondary trauma in my work with police officers who are investigating that sort of crime.
Yes. And I think we said earlier, it's almost like coming out in sympathy in trauma and witnessing these things.
Well, if you are sympathetic, and if you're closer to that situation, if you've got, for example, if you're dealing with a child death and you have a child of a similar age, that is going to cause you much more problem than it would, to someone that perhaps doesn't have a child. There are situations that make some people more vulnerable at different times in their lives, and we need to be mindful of that. So if you're putting someone into I know sometimes I would interview people or assess people going into working in child abuse, and I've had people where they're pregnant who've never worked in child abuse before, and I really say, I don't really want you to do that. After you've had a child, think about it, and then you can reapply. But I don't want to put you into that situation because I'm not sure how you're going to react to it and how that might affect your relationship with your child if your mind is full of, horrendous images. Yes. So it's important that we look after people. So that's the secondary trauma that we deal with. But, just the kind of work that people have where they're dealing with upset and distraught people day in, day out, which is, a lot of policing work is about that these days. That in itself can, although you're not going to have flashbacks and you're not have nightmares about it, you're going to be emotionally exhausted by dealing with, the emotions of people all of the time.
It's the drip effect, isn't it?
Very much. It's sort of the long-term effect, and you can stay in a job for quite a long time, but there comes a point where you reach your the end of the time you can do it safely, and you need a bit of a change, and that could be as little as doing a project and doing some training or moving into a slightly different role for a while. That's the sort of thing that I very often advise for people that are beginning to show signs of compassion fatigue. Let's have a bit of a change. So if you've been working in child abuse, go into CID for a bit and do something else, and get your skills changed a little bit or learn something new is going to be useful. And then the last one is burnout. And to be quite frank, all I'm getting at the moment is, in talking to police officers, is there's more and more work to be done. Nothing gets any less, and there's less and less time to do it, and people are just working flat out all of the time. And, that is not unique to policing. That's in lots of different jobs where people are in this situation. But when you've got a combination of primary trauma, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue and burnout, you've got a toxic kind of collection of things that's going to make it much more important that you have healthy people who've got resilience and ability to deal with this work and need to be looked after.
And I think you summed it up in one of your sentences. You said working flat out all of the time. Nobody's getting a rest. I think that's the problem, isn't it?
It really is important, because one of the biggest ways of solving trauma symptoms is something called, there's endorphins and oxytocin. Endorphins and oxytocin are increased when you have time to talk to people. The kind of chat that you get, between officers, the joking and all of that. That building together of this social network where people feel that they're part of a group and you can have a laugh and you like to be with people and you enjoy it. That actually increases your resilience dramatically. But unfortunately, as time has gone on, there's more and more, people going out on their own, no one to talk to. I mean, double crewing is a luxury for lots of jobs. And, sometimes I've got to beg that, if someone is, I need to get them back into work, they must have double crewing for a while, just so that they can talk through the jobs and that they can actually regain their confidence and their skills. And I think that unless there is some mindfulness of this, and that it isn't just about getting the last drop of sweat out of a police officer in order to get a job done, that if you push them to that extent, you're going to get more sick people, and you need that kind of socializing event in order to actually keep them well.
Well, this is why I'm enjoying this conversation, because I know I feel better talking to people and sharing a problem than everybody else does. And you told me why now.
Well, shall I just tell you one other thing on that, and you can cut it out if you like, but one of the big crusades that I've had was with the firearms officers, and the IPCC have this view that you must separate, after there's been a shooting, you must separate the firearms officers, because they will collude with each other and make up a story about what happened. I do understand that legal situation, but firearms officers, if you separate them out, first of all, you've got the cognitive distortion, which you talked about how long and how distant and when did it happen and all of that kind of stuff, which is very difficult to challenge if you just kept on your own, because you keep on thinking, yes, it was 15 minutes when it was, 2 minutes. Yeah. So what happens when you bring the group together, not to discuss the case, but actually just to say, well, were you there or were you there? That makes their evidence much more accurate than if you keep them separate. Also, you reduce the likelihood of them developing PTSD. And I've actually written to the IPCC about that, and I think they have softened their views slightly because of it, because it is so important that you have this joining together, coming together of groups, rebuild your confidence, and because those are the people who understand what you've been through.
Yes. I know there's going to be one person who's going to be listening to this podcast. He's called Harry Tangi. He's a firearms commander in Devon, and I interviewed him last year, and we were discussing this exact problem about after an incident, officers were separated, and he said, imagine you've just been to a firearms, you're covered in blood, the last thing you want to be doing is separated from your work colleagues.
Totally agree. Yeah.
That sort of nicely leads us on to empathy, I suppose. And until recently, I honestly believed it was innate and it couldn't be learnt, but that is in fact incorrect, isn't it?
There are lots of different kinds of empathy, and it's a very complex subject. And it's very easy to undermine empathy. You can switch it off, particularly, I think it gets switched off the higher up you go in the hierarchy very often. Because where people are put under pressure in order to achieve targets, which can be by government or by the public or whatever, people become task focused, and they begin to lose the ability to think about other people, so that decisions can be made about, we will organise things in this particular way without taking due concern to what's that going to do to people. So there is that process, and it's all to do with neurotransmitters. I won't go into it, but there are different neurotransmitters that are involved with fear, that are involved with performance, and then we've got our nice oxytocin that actually is about building people up and having them together. And you will have organisations that are just pressurising all of the time, but they will cause havoc in the team below if they don't pay attention to their people. Empathy can be turned off. We all have the ability to empathise with people, so that within our brains we have parts of the brains that do things. So we've got something called mirror neurons, really exciting things discovered in the UK. So it's a good UK thing, and they fire according to what you're looking at. So if you're looking at someone digging a hole in the ground, the mirror neurons in your brain will fire as if you are digging a hole in the ground.
Right.
So can you see that actually it's biological as well?
Yes.
Okay? Because the neurons are telling you that's what that person is doing. So to some extent you get a sense of it. And we all feel that all of the time. So that's going on in our heads. But a lot of our empathy is going on in our bodies, so we feel what the other person feels. And some people are more involved in that way than others. They're more sensitive, so that they will have a much stronger gut feel or much stronger hunches. I've met police officers that just look at someone and they kind of know they're wrong, and because of something they're wearing or in the wrong place, or there's something about it, and they're much more accurate at doing that than other people. Other people could walk along the street and not notice anything. Other people can. So there's something important about having that empathetic attunement. The problem happens if you are not processing it and you're not dealing with it properly, because it's a kind of emotional and physical load. So what people need to be able to do is to work out, what do I need to do? So you almost begin to take over some of the pressure that goes on your body by analysing it cognitively. So in a way you look at a situation and say, so what is my purpose in dealing with this? What am I supposed to be doing? What is the most appropriate thing in this situation? And you then, it's almost like you've got an executive function that is saying, this is how I'm going to deal with it. And you don't use your guts to do it. And you need to be able to move from your guts into your head and that cognitive empathy as opposed to the gut empathy. And that just stops people getting worn out. It's really important. It is also important to realise that when that happens, it doesn't feel the same. And I do get some people sometimes saying to me, Noreen, I think, I don't care about people anymore because I don't get as upset as I did.
It didn't feel right.
It didn't feel right, yeah. I should have been more upset about it. Now, that could be because you dissociated, but it could be because you've actually automatically developed the cognitive empathy. You are still empathising with the person, but you're doing it in a way which is not damaging to you.
It's almost like giving a service to somebody. The difference between that is and how you feel about it. The end result is still the same. It's how you feel about it. And that can be hard to switch off for some people. I mean, I know I've been guilty of that in the past, where I've almost had to feel their pain in order to think that I can help them.
Because I listen to lots of stories all of the time, the way I think about it for myself is that I'm walking through, because I kind of see their trauma as a kind of frightening forest, so it's dark and it's miserable and it's scary and there's animals and whatever there. And so I'm walking alongside them, but I know more about this forest than they do, and I'm stronger than they are. So I can support them as we walk through, and they deal with all of their fears about this situation. If I'm as scared of the forest as they are, I'm going to be absolutely useless. So I've got to be strong so that I can take them through. I can't have the fears that they've got. And, it's that, in that way I feel that I'm able to be of use to them. Because I can't, You know, if I felt for every client I've got, I usually see 4 clients a day.
Yes.
By the end of the day,
You're worn out.
I can't. The last one get nothing, absolutely nothing. But you know, I do care about. It's not that I don't care. I care intensely about everybody I see.
Yes.
I want them to get well, but feeling their fears, feeling their distress, isn't going to help them.
No.
So what's my purpose? My purpose is to get them well, to get them through the forest, so that they get to somewhere where they're comfortable. And that's my job. When I've done that, I've done my job. So I need to know when I've finished. And when I've finished, hopefully they feel that they've had the journey, there's been someone there that's taken them by the arm and just been there for the time that they need them.
And I suppose it's having that clarity of mind as well. And if you sink into their feelings, you may not have that clarity of mind that you need to help them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a bit like, you know, when you're doing an interview, I'm not a police officer, but when you're doing an interview, you have a kind of plan in your head about where you need to get to at the end of that. You kind of ask the questions because you're taking the person exactly the same way through that walk around, because you need to get to a certain point. You know what? So using that executive function to get to that place, it's exactly the same. You just use the same skills that you've got.
Yes. So now we know that how we think about an event can directly affect and how we deal with trauma. What can organisations do to help their workforce?
I think there are a lot of things that need to be done. There's a need for people to be educated in some of the things that we've been talking about. That's why I'm keen to do this podcast, just so to get the information out, because people don't know.
No.
You know, that this is pretty straightforward stuff and it's understandable. So if people aren't frightened of it, then I think they're much more able to talk about it and, you know, to be able to say, look, hang on, I'm not feeling that great about the biggest message. Trauma is not a long-term condition. You know, it's not like schizophrenia or something like that.
Sure.
It's something you get and you get over. Generally, most people get over it. So that's important. I think you need to have that openness in the culture that says it is okay to talk. I would like to have more opportunities for sergeants and teams and inspectors and people to get together to talk to each other about what matters and, you know, how they're going to solve problems together. And, you know, put some of those things back again that were there. There is a need for just asking people how they're doing when they've come back from a difficult job. And, you know, it's only a few minutes just to say, so, you know, I heard that you went to a cot death or you did this. How was it? Are you okay? Do you need anything? You know, if just 1 or 2 words make a massive difference about how do you feel about, you know, do people care about me or they don't care about me? Or has everyone gone home because I was late back? You know, or did someone give me a call just to say, were you okay? So that really matters. You need proper interventions if there is a big incident, you know, like the arena or something. You need to have a plan within the organisations to deal with a disaster. And I think for those jobs where there is a known level of risk and trauma, so that would be the investigators of road crashes, it would be the child abuse people, you do need, I think, a programme of screening to make sure that they aren't actually becoming burnt out and traumatised over the period of time, because that's a known risk. You put them in a situation, so you need to do something a little bit extra for that group who've got a higher risk of actually developing things.
I know some organisations have what they would call hot debriefs, which is sort of immediately after something. They would not a full debrief, but just have a quick chat about it, I suppose, because things can be lost later down the line, can't they?
I think those are really important, and it's just attitudes, the way people are treated. You know, that it doesn't even take a long time. You know, just a few minutes, just to say, how are you? Bringing the group together, you know, that endorphin, oxytocin business, just bringing people together, saying, that was a bad event, you know, recognising it, you know, how are you doing, you know, are you sleeping, are you eating, have you got anybody at home to talk to, or are people, having difficulties? Because if they have, you just need a little bit more, humanity. That's all we're talking about, just being kind of human beings. We're not talking about being therapists, we're just being nice to people, I guess.
Yes. So finally, we've talked about what the organisation can do. What can we ourselves do to help us deal with trauma, both in work and in our day-to-day lives?
Being resilient is about having a balanced lifestyle, having a good family if you can, getting on with people, having hobbies, taking exercise, eating, the right food. And I know police officers are the worst people in the world for eating Mars bars and crisps, seems to be the diet of lots of the people I see. But, it isn't, you need to be fit and healthy to do your job. You need to learn how to relax. You need to recognise when you're not right, and you need to talk about it. And, find people that you get on with, that you can actually have a conversation saying, this is a bit tough for me at the moment. Can I have a chat about what's going on for me? And, if you're really not feeling right, get in touch with occupational health, because they will be able to help you. Yes. You just need to get the help as quickly as you can, so you don't start having other problems.
Yeah, but I suppose we're wandering slightly into the area of stigma now, aren't we? Because police officers, being the people they are, don't want to let their colleagues down, don't want to let the team down, don't want to say, well, listen, I need a bit of time out here, because that brings feelings of guilt that they're letting the team down.
Do you know what's really interesting is if they asked their colleagues whether it would be okay to do that, everyone would say it's all right for everybody else to do that, but it's not all right for me. So everybody's kind of protecting each other, which is crazy. Actually, we all need help every now and again, and it's going to balance out. So why don't you just be a little bit more open and talk about what you need, and people can say, well, yes, I'm going to help you, or no, I'm not, but I bet they help you.
Yeah. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating. I could speak to you all night. I know that you've got a long day ahead of you tomorrow. So, Noreen Tehrani, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
DCT Audio. The art of good listening.